Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome to episode number 17 of the White Knuckle Podcast. Well, hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into the White Knuckle Podcast. As always, we appreciate your listenership. Today we're going to be joined by Brandon Hammonds. Brandon hosts a podcast called Take Aim Outdoors. Brandon was also a teammate of Todd and I's, a few years ago now, and has recently been killing some beautiful bucks over there in the state of Michigan. Brandon, as I said, has a podcast that's called Take Aim Outdoors. It's a podcast essentially like ours that's devoted to people's passion of the hardcore sport of archery hunting for whitetail deer. It was a lot of fun to catch back up with Brandon and get to talk about his strategies for taking some of those Michigan bucks because I find his style of hunting very similar to mine. Whatever the case, I think you'll find this a very informative episode as Todd, myself, and Brandon discuss all the different tips and tactics that we use, whether it's hunting in Iowa, Michigan, or Wisconsin. So with that, sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation with Mr. Brandon Hammonds. Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 17. Today I'm joined with my co-host Todd Prignitz and Brandon Hammonds. Hi guys, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
I'm doing great, man. I'm excited to talk shop with Brandon and Jason again as always. And it's a beautiful day in Southeast Iowa. So what better way to start off the podcast than talk about the history with Mr. Brandon Hammonds. I actually met Brandon many years ago now, but back in the White Knuckle days, he actually filmed with us for a while, and he was a guy that was killing huge bucks in Michigan for on video. And I mean, if anybody's from Michigan, you know how often that happens. It doesn't, but Brandon and I became friends, and Brandon since has started his own podcast, Take Aim Outdoors. So we happened to get caught up this year at the ATA show, actually. And we started talking. I was like, dude, we need to kind of work together and see what we can do to do some cross promotion because Brandon and I have always gotten along so well. He's a serious hunter. He gets the job done even in places like Michigan. So welcome to the show, Brandon.
Hey, thanks, man. Great intro. I appreciate that. But yeah, excited to be here, man. Absolutely. So thank you guys for having me, and excited to be able to do some stuff with you guys as well.
Brandon,
yeah, absolutely.
How long ago was it that we were, well, I guess you'd call it teammates?
It
was in the grind.
Okay.
The first year with White Knuckle would be the grind.
Yeah, and I still remember it because he killed an absolute beautiful 8-pointer, like 130 type. What was it, Brandon? I forget exactly right off top.
Yeah, 133 it scored.
There you go. But I still remember the shot he had it on and everything because it was like at the time it was a big mature deer, and it was like probably one of the first Michigan kills I'd ever even really seen, let alone it was a big 4 or 5 year old I remember.
Huge deer.
Now, Brandon, are you still hunting on the same property that you were back then?
Yeah, I am actually. And I've added a piece or two, but that's matter of fact, that's my main farm. And believe it or not, Todd, I believe that was my first year ever on that farm back then. So
really,
yeah, but I still have it.
Kidding, dude. That is fantastic. And you know the cool part about it, especially if that was your first year, what have you seen happen with antler restrictions? Because Michigan's made some changes since I've moved. Have you noticed what's the hunting in your area? I guess doing, is it getting better or is it getting tougher?
You know, that's kind of in a way a loaded question, and I don't, not like on purpose loaded, but what happened was about the same time as the antler restrictions came in, we had the 2012 bout of VHD. So, it's really hard to kind of connect the two, but I'm starting to see a lot better, bigger deer. I do think that I have a special piece of ground for Michigan anyways. And with that being said, it's just total, not that I get to hunt it all, but I have a 2.5 mile stretch by a mile stretch with no roads through it. And that's pretty unheard of for Michigan. For an all, big solid square piece of property. So, that's one of the reasons I just think that every year I've been really fortunate, at least on camera, on a scouting camera, that, I end up getting, a couple 4 and 5 year old deer, let alone several 3-year-olds.
That's for anybody from non-Michigan, like my Iowa buddies are like, dude, what do you mean? Why are you even thinking about hunting? But for Michigan standards, if you get anything over 3 years old, and Brandon can verify it, that's considered a trophy by anybody in Michigan. So if you're even getting to that 4-year-old plus stage, you definitely have something going. And, you hit the nail on the head, dude, when you said, I've got that section with no roads through it. I kind of have a similar situation here in Iowa where it's a big enough section where deer can find a hole to crawl into and survive. And that's, dude, you're not going to get those big mature deer if they die. So you hit the nail on the head there. Now, how many guys would you guess hunt in the area? And are they QDM type guys, or is it the same Michigan mentality?
Unfortunately, it's the same Michigan mentality. But one thing that sort of happened is, one neighbor to the south of me is kind of, he stopped letting guys hunt. And, I don't know the situation. I think he just was one of those farmers that kind of let anybody hunt. And then I think just finally got probably fed up with the, what I'll call the non-serious kind of weekend hunter. So, sure. He basically let those guys go, and he's got a really big chunk of land, and it's a really good chunk of land. So long story short, quickly 2.5, 3 years goes by. That really benefits me because, I'm trying to pass as many deer as possible to get to that, kind of special age. So that's been one bonus. And like I said, I think another bonus is, whether you believe it or not, we're getting that strong crop of deer that survive that EHD. And to me, I'm first time I've noticed, I'm seeing deer that are, at that age of 4 and 5, but they're all 250, 60 pounds. They're just these genetic freaks. They're awesome deer. So, between the two, that's really benefited me, just being able to, have a section where I don't have that hunting pressure, so to speak.
Yeah. And whether you create that or you're just, lucky enough to have it nearby, it's a similar situation here. There's areas that have big areas of sections of property that just do not have any hunting pressure. And that does more than one thing. It's a sanctuary, but the other great part about it is it gives these deer an area to live, to do their thing without any hunting pressure or human pressure. So they're not educated like a lot of the other bucks are. And, that's one of the factors that I've had to deal with here in Iowa, some different guys that were hunting on adjacent properties and stuff where, after shed season, they have permission to hunt there or whatever. I go out and I do my scouting and, dude, they've got stands where I know where they have to go through to get to them. They're 15 feet off the ground, sticking out in the wide open where that every mature deer that walks through there pegs them in the tree, every single one. And that happens year after year after year, man. It doesn't take too long you can even start noticing the trail cameras where the bucks just stop moving during daylight. I mean, they will just shut down. So those sanctuary properties, man, I absolutely love having a sanctuary nearby with no hunting pressure. Just from that standpoint, it gives them a place to chill, relax, and you're just far more likely to catch them out and about when the time is right.
Yeah, man, I'm a huge believer in that. And I'm also a believer in, probably as you guys are, that, every deer has his or her own personality. And eventually when you get up and they get to move around, they're going to kind of wonder what's on this side of the fence and what's over here. And all of a sudden, if I'm not pressuring my piece, their home range kind of expands a little bit. And I catch a lot of that. It's like they know I'm there sometimes because I do go in to run cameras or feed mineral because it's legal in Michigan. But I notice those deer are coming and going, and sometimes they're coming and staying a lot more on my property. So it's just a matter of time. So if you do catch, I guess that's a good tip. Notice a neighbor that nobody's hunting. Before you know it, you're going to start to see a lot more deer traffic on your own side if you're not pressuring it.
Yeah, and dude, I've had this conversation, especially at trade shows. We get into a lot of conversations about this. Guys, the first question they ask you is, how many acres do you hunt? And I think some of them expect me to say, 10,000 acres or whatever. But I would so much rather have neighbors, and here where I'm at in Iowa, my neighbors are all kind of elderly. They're a little bit up in age. They're all old farmers or not hunters themselves, but I don't have a ton of, serious hunters in my neighborhood. So the thing that I have been able to utilize in combination with, obviously, with that sanctuary property and having mature deer around is the food factor. When you've got all these different neighbors that are all chasing the same deer, they're all putting food plots in, they're all running trail cameras. That's a lot of human activity out in the field year round, because generally we're all crazy and out there doing stuff maybe sometimes when we shouldn't be. But, see, that plays a lot of it. And just that repeated history in an area will teach a fawn when it's being raised by its mother, and the mother will, translate that information and create those habits early in their lives where, they kind of are used to not moving around as much. So just like what you were just talking about, having neighbors that don't hunt or properties you can't get into is not a bad thing. And you got to use all those little elements. But if we can, Brandon, what do you do for food? And do you use food plots and standing crops or anything like that on your farm there?
Now, my farm is surrounded by agriculture. So anywhere there is a open, or flat piece of ground where the farmers can farm, they farm it. So for years, matter of fact, 2016 was the first time I ever hunted over a food plot. That wasn't here. That was in my farm in Indiana, which I shot a nice deer on. But I've never actually got to hunt over a food source in Michigan ever. So in a way, I kind of have been killing, some of these deer just the old school way, so to speak. But I absolutely use the advantage of crops, when it comes to cover or finding an inside corner where the deer just feel safe and will come out of cover or bed to go feed. But yeah, I do that kind of hunting quite a bit.
Well, and that, to be honest, I think that's probably why you've been killing all those big deer, because I've kind of gone full circle on hunting food plots when I, first bought my farm in Iowa. And then I first got my ATV, I think 3 years ago, and it was the first piece of equipment I owned, and I had my own piece of ground finally, and I went bananas, and I still am a little bananas, but I was hunting and creating everything based on food plots and hunting right near them because, dude, who doesn't want to go hunt on a food plot and kill a mature buck on video? And it's also cool being on the ground, especially when you've spent your whole previous career or life up in a tree. So, but I started to realize I was falling prey to the laziness. Especially self-filming, it's so much easier sitting in a blind with a camera on a tripod. You can just get on the deer. You're controlling the shot, where they're going to be, so much easier. So I started kind of getting lazy, to be honest. And this past season, I kind of said to myself, I need to get back in the trees and start chasing them like I used to. So I honestly believe even guys like Lakoski and these guys who have these huge farms and all these food plots, I think sometimes just because of sponsors, because of filming, sometimes, man, I think we probably sit in ground blinds a little bit too much. And I think sometimes that'll affect your ability to kill them with a bow. But when you're only, a bow hunter, that's all I've been doing. I think, Brandon, I don't know if you are a gun hunter or not, but it's a big difference when you're trying to kill one and only planning on killing one with a bow versus, well, I've always got shotgun or muzzleloader season to get it done if I don't get it done with a bow. It's there's a mental switch there some ways.
Yeah, I agree with you. I occasionally, once every 10 years, I'll gun hunt just to gun hunt to change it up and do something fun because, I think sometimes we forget that we're supposed to be having fun. So, I'll do stuff like that just to remind myself, go have fun, go sit in the opening day with, a buddy or, my father-in-law, do something like that. But, Todd, to get back to ground blinds for 1 minute, that I know you kind of just spoke maybe on the negative side, but what's some of the positive sides that you've noticed, with that transition to hunting ground blinds?
Well, it just like what you said, it was fun, to be honest. The first time, and this is the truth, man, if you can believe this, the first time I ever really hunted out of a ground blind for deer, shipwreck showed up an hour later. And I had that deer at 35 yards in front of me in a ground blind, and I'll never forget how humongous it looked and how unbelievably out of control. I had buck fever so bad. It was so crazy trying to determine where the deer was, get everything ranged, because when you're in a tree, man, with experience, you kind of create that radius around your stand where you know where 20 yards is, you know where 30 yards is, you know where 40 yards is, just based on angles and just experience. Well, you go on the ground, man, and that is all gone instantly. And they look so much closer than they actually are, just because you don't have that distance in the tree that you're working with. But I absolutely love hunting out of ground blinds, and I absolutely hate hunting out of ground blinds at the same time. You can control your wind a lot better out of them, but man, you're always wondering what's in the back of the blind, what's behind you. And what I've started to notice now that I've had enough experience, and I've had year after year after year of hunting through them with different deer, and then watching the deer grow up around them as well, most mature deer just do not feel comfortable in front of a ground blind within 30 or 40 yards. So they pretty much will just buffer around you. I mean, there's times where they don't, but I mean, they just have a feeling or something that they don't want to get within 50 yards. So from that standpoint, it's always in the back of your mind when you're sitting in a ground blind, because you know you're probably going to have to take a longer shot at a big buck. And so that can be kind of stressful, man. It kind of wears you out. But there's a time and place for them, like anything. And now what I try to do is save my ground blinds specifically for late rut. I don't even hunt them during October. I take that back. I might go out for fun and shoot a doe or something like that out of one. But now I leave those completely alone, because I know my best chance to actually kill a mature buck out of one is going to be late rut, when they're worn down and they get a little vulnerability in combination with a cold front. That's when I found you can kill them, and that's when I actually got Eric Dickerson, which I never thought in a million years I could catch that deer in front of a ground blind. But again, he came in 40, 45 yards, and he was just going to walk right around us when I shot him. But I think it's a part of every hunter's arsenal, most definitely. But with a bow, it is tough. They just don't want to get that close to them. But I think that they can be extremely deadly. But the one part I will say too, dude, is I think you can also kind of ruin areas with them. Particularly, I've got a killer little food plot out in the sanctuary, and it's just a kill plot. It's unbelievable. And I was running my camera, one of my Spartans over at this past rut, and I had it way up in a tree overlooking the scrape. And I watched that camera for a month and a half, and I did not have a mature deer walk in front of that camera, which was right in front of the blind that I put out there. Even at dark, I only had a couple pictures. And so kind of like in the back of my mind, I was thinking, man, I don't think I'm going to be able to kill a buck out of that. And it ended up kind of ruining the spot. I really believe that. So I don't know what I'm going to do this year, but I know, like, dude, when you're hunting the food plots, like, you got to have a ground blind. And if you can, get it elevated. But for the most part, everything is so dependent on the situation, the time, and all that. But I think, like anything, the ones that are the cool spots, you end up overhunting them. So that's why I just kind of draw a line in the sand and just stay out of my ground blinds until the time's right now.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. Have you experimented with the elevation of the ground blinds?
Yeah, and if anything, I think it makes it a little tougher to film out of. You get a better view and everything, of course, but I don't know. I think it just kind of ups the pressure a little bit on the deer. It's bigger. And they're not used to it around here. I think a ground blind, if you imagine what a deer looks at when they see a ground blind, they don't think, holy crap, there's a hunter in there, and he's either got a gun, a bow, or a muzzleloader, or a crossbow, and he's going to kill me. It's just a foreign object to them. So for me around here, I've had ground blinds on the ground for a long time. I think as soon as you put them up and you change it up, it just does that. It just makes it a little different, and they don't like it as much. But over a period of time, obviously, they'll get used to it and not have any concern. But a lot of it's the hunting pressure around you dictates what you're going to see in front of your blinds. And we always use, I'm very fortunate to be friends with Rich Baugh and Tyler Tissue and some guys who hunt here not too far from my house, 10 miles or something, probably as the crow flies. But they've got an incredible section where they control a huge area of property. So it's like about as good as it gets around here. And Rich knows what he's doing. He's got plenty of ground to cover. but he also stays off his property, hardly even hunts legitimately until late October. And he owns, I think, close to 500 acres or something. But they've got the perfect setup, and I've seen his farm, and I've seen the footage, and anybody who watches Whitetail Properties has seen Rich's stuff. And he has the most natural behavior on his farm that you could ever imagine or even consider to be lucky to have or to be around, where the deer just don't have any pressure, which means they move around during daylight and are just so much easier to kill. So that's 10 miles away, and the deer here on this farm, on my farm, act completely different. They're hunted more. There's more pressure. They've been shot at and or wounded, through their whole lives. Not like, some of the deer that grow up on these managed farms where they literally just have never been hunted, until they get 5, 6, 7 years old. And it makes a big difference, man. It makes a huge difference. So everything I do, I always kind of have like a pressure scale, and like depending on what time of the year it is, as the season progresses, and let's say you start in October 1st, the reaction, just even we get on ozonics, it changes through the season based on hunting pressure, the rut, weather conditions, and then food. And as the food starts to dry up and maybe they can't find as many acorns, and if the green is dead early and they can't find as much browse, all of those things put a little bit more stress on the animals, and that just makes them less likely to move during daylight naturally. So that's the hardest part about deer hunting is you've got all these factors, and I'm still trying to understand half of them, believe me. But the one factor that you can control is hunting pressure or a lack of hunting pressure on your farm, and that's one huge, huge thing. And that's a lot of it. Just not hunting until it gets good. And I kind of follow Rich's law now. I mean, I used to go out and film and hunt my butt off all of October, and just about the time where you'd start to finally see some deer movement, especially in the mornings, you'd be so burnt out and tired from hunting so hard, and you've ripped all your spots out, you've burnt them up before they get good. So now, like if I'm hunting early season at all, unless I'm on one, and if I'm on one, I'll go after them. But for the most part, I just stay out of my good stuff. And if I want to go hunt and, work the cobwebs out, I'll hunt a secondary property or hunt like a field edge way out where I kind of want to intentionally put pressure. And that's another way you can look at it too is, you don't necessarily have to hunt your best spots. You can actually put a controlled amount of pressure in certain areas to try to dictate where that deer is going to be next week or even tomorrow morning or whatever.
If we can just for a second revisit the ground blind topic, David and I have had a tremendous amount of success over the years. His farm is odd in that there's a huge chunk of timber of which he can hunt 20 acres of actual timber. The rest of it is crop fields, and by and large, everything to the north of us there is timber, or a large part of it is. So a lot of the deer end up coming to his fields to feed, and that it's a great place to see deer. It's the hardest place, in my opinion, to hunt deer, because trying to kill a buck that walks out of a 400-yard stretch of timber along a field is, getting a hole in one. It's not easy to do. Quite frankly, it's nearly impossible. But one of the things that David and I, particularly David, I guess, I'll give him credit for this, have had a tremendous amount of success with is taking an old grain wagon. Everybody's replaced those now, those old orange grain wagons, and putting and I know some states it's not legal, but in Wisconsin it is, putting just a flooring on the top of it, and or just an old hay rack wagon, whatever the case may be, a wagon, set the ground blind right on that, and you can hunt it that night. I don't know why it seems to make all the difference in the world, but you put that thing on a wagon and they they don't seem to be bothered by it at all. Whereas if you stuck that thing on the ground, like, Todd, you just got done saying, I think Brandon, you had mentioned it earlier, they'll turn inside out the first couple of times they see it. Whereas I've seen it time and again. You put it on one of those wagons, and David's family, they're farmers, so he's got access to that stuff. But it's ridiculous how effective it is. Now, again, you're still fighting the battle of the deer coming out in the right spot, because they've got, in 400 yards, they've got 40 trails to come out of, or what have you. So that makes it a tough situation anytime you're hunting a field edge. But if it's legal in your state, it's not a bad idea to try. I don't know that it's going to be any different in Michigan, because that's farm country too, correct, Brandon?
Where I am, it is mostly. I'm in very southern Michigan. Matter of fact, I'm roughly maybe 10, 12 miles from the Indiana state line. So I'm pretty south. And this part of the state is known for agriculture. So, yeah, it's mostly ag, but, I would assume that works awesome. What you just said, Jason, that's a really great tip. And I would definitely look forward to kind of stealing that tip from you for sure.
It worked great late season. But again, it's they don't turn inside out or anything like that. They just come out and take a look at it, and it's probably just like any other hay rack wagon they've seen, or grain cart that they've seen, or anything else. It just happens to have a blind on the top of it.
And I also, if you don't have a hay wagon or access to a hay wagon, we're going to give Dave's phone number at the end of the show, and you get a hold of Dave by text message. And he will make sure that he brings it over to your place so you can use it. Just on a serious note, bail blinds are something that I've had. I think they lesser the stress level a little bit. And I've had mine out year after year after year, and they also cut hay around me, and they always roll it in round bales. So, dude, if you're a deer and you grow up and you see that stuff, it's obviously going to be a little less freak out mode. But Jason, when you were just talking about hunting field edges, like back in my green days of first hunting in Illinois, and we actually hunted some really good properties, and even in Iowa when I moved to Iowa, and starting to hunt farmland for the first time for a Michigander. I grew up hunting in the north and the timber. There was no farmland. There wasn't a field that you could really hunt by. It was all public national forest. And so, of course, when you first get your taste of hunting food plots and field edges, it's what you've been watching on TV. Jackie Bushman, he's been killing giants on these fields for years. That must be the ticket. So I can't tell you how many giant bucks I chase around fields, hunt after hunt after hunt, because that's where you kill them, right? Well, over the years and experience, I actually, to this day, dude, I can't stand hunting field edges. I can't take it. I don't want to, if I see a deer, I want to be able to kill it. I don't want to sit and watch them 500 yards away. So if I can give any piece of advice to anyone, and I see it happen all around here all the time, there's a couple reasons why people hunt fields. You can't get lost getting in and out of them in the dark. And it's easier to set your stands. You don't have to trim as much, man. You got a wide open shot right to the field, right? Now, with that being said, man, I'll tell you, I would rather go after him in the timber, because your chances for success are so much better if you can narrow it down. And just like what Jason said, you can watch them come out any trail, and man, they will never come out the same trail twice, not these big ones. And I still fall victim to it. I was chasing the DL buck this year, and I watched him come out a field edge one night, and I was there the next night, and of course he didn't show up. But, I had to mentally, I'm like, I have to try. But boy, I think a lot of guys, bow hunters, waste a lot of time on field edges when they really, really need to be, back in the timber closer to the bedding areas, because that's where the big ones feel comfortable moving around during daylight. So you got to get on tight on them. And, if you've been successful and you're killing huge deer out on your food plots and your field edges, dude, kudos to you. You've done a lot better job than I have. But I've just noticed, seems like you give up the likelihood of kill in order to get that visual advantage sometimes.
Well, I think just having walked to your property, Todd, it's I don't, and Brandon, I don't know what yours looks like, but just the contrast in topography and the overall lay of the land between what Todd hunts and what I hunt are two very different things. So, the fields that Todd is hunting are, my gosh, what are they, a mile long, Todd? 3 miles?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, some of them are absolutely giant. To sort of put your stand and to watch a deer 500 yards away or 100 yards away, and then be able to go home and brag, hey, I saw 57 bucks today. Some guys like that. They want the action, and usually that's why field edges are so popular. It's just because, dude, you're going to see a lot. But all the wise guys, the hunters that I really learned from, that helped teach me the tools of the trade. This isn't stuff I've invented. They always just say the same thing. I'm not interested in seeing 50 deer. I'm interested in seeing the one buck I'm after. And if I see no other animal but that one buck, then it's a successful hunt. And to be honest, the other reason I hate hunting fields is, especially in the evenings, the deer all show up, and then how the heck do you get out of there without completely blowing the entire neighborhood? And you really can't. So we've invented ways of trying to spook the deer off, like without making them spook as much. But now I kind of just plan on I'm going to blow the fields. I'm going to blow them, but then I know where they're not going to be tomorrow, or where they're not going to be tonight or tomorrow night, let's say at last light. I kind of use that then. And then I can basically play off of what areas I put pressure into and try to anticipate what the buck that I'm after's next move might be if he was a part of the group that got blown out or whatever.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. At least here in Michigan, as soon as a field is cut, I won't hunt it. Now, there's an exception to the rule always, but at least in Michigan, you're not ever, unless it's the rut and you just got that one super hot buck on a doe, you're never, ever going to kill a buck on a field edge in Michigan, ever, unless that one exception to the rule. Now, the only other exception, occasionally I'll hunt field edges, Todd and Jason, is if it's only what I would call a secluded field, where it almost works more like a food plot than it does an ag field. And if it's secluded and it's a small little 8 to 10 acre, ag field that at least on 3 sides is covered, I'll hunt those field edges sometimes in the evening where, like Todd just mentioned, I do have an exit strategy. If not, it's the biggest no-no, at least in Michigan. I don't hunt them at all.
Why do you think that is? Because I'm just going to admit my sins right now. I find myself, I would say before November 1st, 100 or 110% of the hunting that I do is on field edges. Now, when we're talking about my field edges, we might be talking about an 11-acre bean field and a 16-acre cornfield and a 9-acre alfalfa field that is covered on 2, 3, 4, in some cases 4 sides. But what do you think makes the difference in Michigan versus? I'm not saying I've had a ton of success killing big bucks on field edges. As a matter of fact, I've only killed one, and that was Splitter, and that was just an accident, man. I had nothing to do with that. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and my arrow landed where it was supposed to. Other than that, I really didn't do anything. But
that was an early season hunt, right, Jay?
September 28th. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't plan on going. Yeah, I didn't plan on going. The wind was right. It was in the field that I was referring to at Dave's. I had put a Banks blind out there, and Sam Wiersma and I went out. It was a Tuesday night, and I just needed to get out and clear my head, so I called him to be my cameraman, and he did. And I'll be darned if the deer didn't walk out and present a broadside shot at 29 yards, and no one was more surprised than me when he walked out.
Oh, that's still one of my favorite hunts too, because you didn't have to track him. He dropped right there, and I'll never forget the look on your face when you came walking back and Sam was still filming you up in the tree, and you were just like, I got him.
Yeah, I had gotten pictures of that deer all year long. But that's typical for our area, and I don't know, Brandon, what your experience is with that. But for me, I can get pictures of deer all summer long, and they'll just vanish or become nearly non-existent once October 15th, 20th comes around. I think a lot of it for me is in the block that I've hunted for the last 15 years. I guess it's maybe 640 acres, but in that 640 acres, there could be, and I've said it before on the podcast, there could be 15, maybe 20, maybe 20 is an exaggeration. 15 certainly isn't, but there could be 15 people in a tree bow hunting with the best of intentions on any given night within that block. Do you have the same? I know Todd doesn't to an extent, but do you have the same over there, Brandon?
Yeah, I do. We have just crazy amount of pressure, and that was the answer I was going to get to about your question about the field edges. Is strictly it's a numbers game, and the numbers tell me we have so many bow hunters per square mile that it's just not in your favor. A big buck is just, nowadays I think he's born with that knowledge. It's just passed on that you show up to that field edge in the dark. And another part of the numbers game is, compared to like you guys in Wisconsin or Todd, I probably have one shooter buck for, every 25 to 50 deer. So when you just play the numbers, you're just not going to get that shooter buck to show up on a field edge in the evening. Yeah.
And I've started to develop some techniques for how to get them out to the field edges. And believe me, I wish it worked every time, but I've noticed the biggest difference, at least here, even if I have whole areas of sanctuary that don't get hunted, you're generally not going to see a mature buck on a field edge unless he is bedded within 50 yards of that field and he has a reason to go out there. And what I've been doing is trying, if I can't control the cover in the surrounding area, I'll leave up standing crops, and like standing corn makes awesome cover and they just feel more comfortable around cover. But I literally try to set my food plots up with an adjacent buck bedding area / doe bedding area on all my plots. And if I don't have a bedding area, I try to create one in the off season, which is going to be, actually, I'm going to start tomorrow on one area. So you're not going to pull them far, but if you're imagining a buck is bedded, let's say in the middle of this timber and the nearest food plot is a quarter mile away, he ain't going to get up and stroll a quarter mile to that food plot during daylight. Now, if he has to stroll 50 or 60 yards and there just so happens to be a giant community scrape on the edge that he might want to check just a little bit early. And then, if I can coax him out of that bed just maybe 5 minutes early with the right call, the right grunt, but not overdoing it. All of those things factor in, because that's the other part of it is I can't imagine across the entire country how many bucks sit in their bedding areas and listen to the hunters out on the field edges rattling and grunting and carrying on, and they know exactly what that is. So I think half the battle is you got to be quiet most of the time, but there are ways to pull those bucks out just a little bit early, but you're not going to pull them a quarter mile, man. You got to kind of come to the realization that, you got to have everything going for you. And every once in a while you might get lucky and see one out on the edge, but, I really want the perfect storm in order to try to create that. And I've just found, at least here in my particular area, that the late, between the 15th, the 12th, and the 18th of November, if there's a really brutal cold front, that has all the right mix of, they've already bred most of the does in their area. They're a little bit more vulnerable from the seeking standpoint at that point again. And then the other part of it is they've been running hard for weeks now, and they have got to replenish their food storage. So but you got to have the right weather, because if it's not brutal cold, they'll just wait an extra 10 minutes, 15 minutes before they get up. They don't have to be out there. So it takes a lot of the right things, but the cool part about it too is the reason why everybody loves the rut. One hot doe can change everything, and all of a sudden, boom, there he is. You just don't know, but relying on that consistently, there's just a reason why I don't hunt food plots that much, or hunt open field edges very much. I'll hunt kill plots, throughout the season when it makes sense. But I almost hunt food plots or field edges just strictly for observation and just as a jumping point, I call them, where, you got your stand hung in advance. You don't quite know what a buck's doing. So you hunt that field edge that you can get into easy as a point of intel, just gathering intel for your next hunt. And sometimes you got to be a little bit more standoffish, and sometimes you need to be aggressive. It's just every deer is different, and every season is different, and the areas and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Brandon,
go ahead.
So I've got a question for you, since you're sort of dealing with the same deck of cards that I am, or at least it sounds that way. And that's, I don't want to give anybody the impression that, what Todd's doing down in his, neck of the woods. Yeah, it's Iowa. But I don't want to give anybody the impression that his job is, a whole bunch easier than mine. Certainly, I think it would be fair to say that luck plays into my equation a whole lot more than it maybe does in his. But I mean, like I said earlier, this year I got to walk that, and there's a lot of choices. Saturday afternoon, I pulled down all of my stands, all 18 of them, on the 112 acres that I hunt, and I thought, what in the world do I have? What do I have 18 stands for? But I guess to get back to my original question, when you go out and hunt, do you feel like you have a solid plan? Because I feel like when Todd goes out, he's got a solid plan. And as much as I'd love to say I have a solid plan, I've got a solid plan. But that plan so much is, the success or failure of it is dictated by so much by pressure.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of Todd alluded to this earlier about just burning the candle at both ends, for years, even recently, just because I own my own business and I don't make money at 6 a.m. I would go hunt every morning when I could. And so now that I've backed off that and obviously learned that you're just putting pressure on stuff. But now, Jason, what I do is just, I guess you could call it like my formula is I'll try to run some cameras that are, again, I try to hang cameras like I hang stands. So if I can get cameras in very low intrusion areas that are high traffic, I do it, and I take advantage of that. I think that's something that's really overlooked, is there's always a spot on property that you can access that deer are going to use. And I may have better spots that deer are always going to, but I don't trample through the woods to get to that camera. Excuse me. So I'll run those cameras, get the most recent information, and then I just play the game of rotation and the best wind. So if I have 15 stands or 10 stands and this is the best wind, I'm going to hunt the stand that's been the longest since I've hunted it, and unless I have some sort of intel to tell me something different. So I keep it really easy, and I don't try to look any more into it. If I don't have any kind of information to tell me to go there, I'm not doing it, especially until we get to that, at least Halloween,
So do you not hunt primarily until the end of October?
I do now. Like I was kind of saying that Todd alluded to, man, I would hunt every morning 80-something straight days until, mid-December, sitting with my bow, and you're freezing in the morning and haven't seen a deer. And, so now I've really backed off where I will run cameras as part of my hunting, and which I do the same thing. I'm not going to go in there and check the same camera every day. I'm rotating those 20 cameras. And then, if it's the best day of the week, where I'm like, what, we got a solid northwest wind or something, or west wind, and the temperature is going to drop 15 degrees. I'm going to go hunt a spot somewhere. So now I look for those days, but I'm really trying to pass on those days in the middle of October and just letting what we call the lull be the October lull, and not trying to put pressure on the deer.
You said it, Brandon. The old mentality of you're not going to kill him from the couch has been ground into our brains since we were kids. And I think you got to be out hunting. You got to be out hunting. You got to be out hunting. In order to be a hardcore bow hunter, you got to hunt every day. And then you learn more and more, and you realize that's about the worst advice and the worst thing you could have. But as humans, more is better, right? I mean, like, we're just wired like that.
Yeah.
We're just wired. So what Brandon was just talking about, he just hit the nail on the head. From October 1st until the end of October, there's usually, here in Iowa, we'll have one or two, maybe even 3 good cold fronts that will come through. On those cold front evening hunts, I'll go out and I'll sit on one of my kill plots. Now, I'm not going to be putting any crazy pressure on, but I'll go to an easy spot, easy to access, where I might get lucky and catch one of those bucks coming out a little bit early. But it's very low pressure spots. In fact, I can back that with a great story. Kyle and I, the first 3 years, I believe, that we filmed White Knuckle Productions, the old Michigan mentality, from October 1st until I was going to kill a deer, we hunted every single morning and every single night from October 1st. And the first 3 years, God, it almost killed us. I mean, I almost killed Kyle, and he probably almost killed me by the end of October. And the year of the grind, I believe it was, we hunted every single morning from October 1st until October 25th. And on October 25th, that was when we saw Bentley, who was a 3-year-old at the time. I thought he was mature, but he wasn't. And that was the first activity of any type of a racked animal. And this is hunting incredible Iowa property. And I was moving around, running and gunning. We were working our tails off the entire year. And that is literally the truth. On October 25th, that was the first time we saw an actual buck move in the mornings. In the evenings on food plots, you can catch them here and there. But, dude, just like what Brandon's saying, you run your trail cameras, and over years of experience of watching those trail cameras and seeing the deer activity, you're not going to kill what's not up moving around. So you can either go blow your spots or be patient, let all your neighbors put the pressure on and move those deer into position for you where they've got a place they're going to hang out. And you're not only pressuring the bucks, you got to realize, where are bucks during the pre-rut, middle of the rut, and post-rut? Their life revolves around does. So you're not only pushing the buck out potentially or putting pressure on that, keeping that buck off the field, but you're also putting pressure on the other deer. And if you can have all those little things aligned where you've got the does, you've got the pressure around you that's pushed him maybe into this core area, you've left it alone, you've waited for the right conditions, that's when you go in the first hunt and you kill the big mature buck in that area on the very first hunt. But you aren't going to do it on October 1st, most likely.
Most likely not. Yeah, you're right, Todd.
So, yeah, I think that's the hard part of being human, is sometimes we have these great big brains and we overanalyze everything and talk ourselves into doing stuff that we normally wouldn't. And, you know, the other part of it too is, and I fall absolute victim just like anybody, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all these different things. You know, as soon as a season starts rolling around, you start seeing these buck pictures come up on the line, and you're watching your Facebook and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to hunt tonight. And then all of a sudden somebody shoots a 200-incher in Kansas or something, you know, and you're just like, oh my God, I want to kill a 200-incher too. So before you know it, you talk yourself into going hunting where you shouldn't be because of the pressure that you're seeing, that you're putting on yourself because of the competition thing, man. Hey, if other guys are out there hunting and killing bucks, I should be too. And so I think social media can be one of the worst things in the world for hunters, just because it kind of pushes you a little bit earlier than you should probably.
I can't disagree with that. I think that there's probably a lot of truth to that. I just don't know that in my area. Not that I want to contradict what you're saying, because I'm not. I just don't. And Brandon, I guess you could speak to this as well. I just don't know that in my area it makes enough difference just because of all the pressure, you know, everywhere else. Or Todd, do you think that because you've got 27, I don't know, let's just say 60, 70 acres of cover, that you're just going to leave it alone? Is that enough to make a difference and keep that mature buck, assuming there is one? You do. How do you feel about that, Brandon?
So I agree. If you have, let me go back, Jason. You're referring to just a section that we're going to call a sanctuary? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that I'm hearing Todd say, you can stay out of that area, wait for those 1, 2, or 3, good cold fronts. Mark Drury would say the same thing, and a lot of other successful hunters would say the same thing. And I always feel like, saying you're in theory that's right, but is staying out of my little 70 acres, in you guys' opinion, is that going to make a difference? In other words, I enjoy hunting. I enjoy going out to hunt, but am I doing myself a disservice by hunting, even though it's a small parcel, in a larger parcel? Am I doing myself a disservice by hunting that? And by not hunting it, am I doing myself a service? In other words, is that enough of a difference in pressure to make a difference?
I got you. Now, what I did notice,
that was long, wasn't it? Sorry.
What I noticed you said earlier, Jason, was you had like roughly, again, this comes down to me, just numbers, right? You have a section that's 640 acres and 15 guys around that section, right? Let those guys work for you. Let those guys put that pressure on and drive deer into your area that you're not hunting. And then you go in there on the perfect days and you get the deal done. I think that, just like Todd said and the jury said, it's really the only way to do it. Now that I'm trying to not be an Iron Man and hunt every day, and now I'm trying to use my brain, good Lord, the deer that I might have killed if I was smarter. You know what I mean? But I would say, advice to you, man, you let those guys put pressure on those deer, because those deer are going to know they're there. Let them drive them into your property, because they're going to go somewhere safe. They are.
They're going to stack them in, buddy. They're going to stack them in deep.
Would you guys say that that same line of thinking, that same methodology would pertain to checking trail cameras as well? We've got a new sponsor this year, different trail camera sponsor, Spartan cameras. Now, I don't have to go in there and check them. For guys that maybe don't have a cellular camera yet, is it still important to stay out of those areas, not just during hunting time, but intrusion, lack of intrusion is, am I hearing? I think that's what I'm hearing you guys say. Lack of intrusion is what's going to help.
Oh, in all ways, shapes, and forms. But the deer are also, like around here, we have farming operations going on all the time. So there's somebody running a piece of equipment on an adjacent property at all given times. So like when I have my trail camera set up, I have them on all my roads that are accessible with either my ATV or my truck, where I literally can sit on my wheeler or in my truck and check the camera from inside the cab. But I use that just like another hunter in an area. I mean, if I got a guy hunting, I know along a food plot edge adjacent to my property or whatever, 200 yards away, I use every one of his stands that I'm aware of, and I like plan for that guy going in and hunting it probably too much early. And I know that downwind of those locations is probably going to be my best bet to catch a mature deer if he's on his feet moving from point A to point B. And the same thing with trail cameras. When I'm out checking my trail cameras in the summer, spring, fall, whatever, specifically in the fall, I am intentionally knowing I'm putting pressure in to check that camera. And so you just kind of got to imagine how that's going to affect your hunt. But I'm usually not putting cameras anywhere near where I'm hunting. But just like what you said, Jason, with the Spartan cams, now that changes something. So I've already found myself from last year, it's not the Bible. And I think sometimes trail cameras can be the demise of us because, long time ago, I went through the same phase that everybody does, I think, when they first get trail cameras, which is you're trying to get pictures of big bucks. And I kind of you come to the realization, you're like, my goal in life is not to get 1 million trail camera pictures a year. My goal is to get enough pictures to know a buck is in the area. Once I know he's in the area, I will use them additionally through the season. But you got to be careful during the rut, especially, man. I swear you can chase your tail around in circles. I think sometimes you got to almost ignore them. And now, unless I'm really hunting one particular buck and I'm really trying to focus on where is he at right at this moment, I won't even really check my cameras during the rut. I'll just let them go for a couple weeks at a time, just knowing those bucks are around. I know where their core areas are. And to me, that's all I really want a trail camera to do, is tell me where a buck's core area is, where he's bedding, where he's feeding. And then you have to use your experience and, your wits as a bow hunter to do the rest. Sometimes, knowing that balance of putting too much pressure on versus not putting enough pressure on, that's the hardest thing a bow hunter goes through. And it's the hardest thing mentally that I go through every year, knowing when is the time, and you just got to follow your gut. But a long time ago, hunting with different guys, I've learned that I would much rather take my chances and be aggressive if my gut is telling me to, than sit back and wonder. But with that being said, man, that's when I know very, very within, I know where a buck's bedded specifically. That's when I'll get aggressive. But otherwise, I think honestly you do more damage than good throughout the season by getting into core areas. So most of my core areas, the only time of year I literally will go into them is during shed season. And then if I haven't killed the buck based on my game plan, that's when I'll get aggressive, throw my lone wolf on my back, and go right into their bedding areas when I've already exhausted all my other possibilities. But I usually won't start doing those types of hunts until mid-November, later in November, and that's when I throw anything out the window and I just go after them, because I figure time is ticking. There's only so much time left in a season. But a lot of guys burn their best stuff out before it really gets good, man. And I'll tell you, from what I've learned in hunting here in Iowa, the bucks I'm going after, which are the 6-7-year-old deer generally, they are more apt to die in the middle to late November. And by that time, most guys have burned through all their vacation time. They've burned through all their tree stands, and they've burned through all their property. And that's why I'm seeing all those bucks in those spots, is because they've been pushed out of other areas, and I've let them be pushed out of those areas. And I've let them soak in, get stacked into those spots. And whether you're hunting 50 acres or 500 acres, you've got to plan your season so that no matter when you go out hunting, you've got a fresh little pocket to move into. And Jay, like for you, it might not be a huge area, but break it down into smaller quadrants and just say, all right, I'm not going to go into that 5 acres. And then, you get to the point of your season where you're starting to realize, okay, time is running out. Then you get aggressive and you move in on that little 5 acres that you've been out of and have not touched all season. In stupid little pockets like that, man, even here in Iowa, you'd be amazed at where some of these bucks find to live. And, Jay, you walked all around out in that property, all around back of my place. And when I ended up hunting Rusty Nail, and even this past year's DL buck, they were bedding within 100 yards of the main parking area for the whole neighborhood.
Okay.
They got all this ground, miles and miles of property. They go climb underneath a log. But you got to realize, man, they're going to be around the does. They're not as far away as you might think. They're going to be around those does, but they're just going to stay in that little pocket area. And you just got to know when to move into that area, I think.
Okay. All right. Does that make sense to you, Brandon? I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, I do. Like Todd said, one big thing is access, and access, with a vehicle or a tractor is huge, I think, just because, again, I'm in agriculture land. So that helps. There are a lot less pressure because of that if you can drive, almost to a trail camera. Unfortunately for me, a lot of mine, will be either in the timber or deep in the cover of the edge of timber on agriculture. So, sometimes I can't get to them. But what I have done is, the golden rule there is don't touch them until I hunt that area. When I go in and hunt, quickly swipe out that, the SD cards. And that's kind of been a solid rule for me. If I'm not hunting that area, the camera just sits there. And that's helped a lot for me as well, too.
That's a really good tip.
Yeah, I would agree. So you attribute a lot of your success, Brandon, and Todd as well, to a lack of intrusion. I've heard Mark Jury say that. If I've heard him say it once, I've heard him say it 100 times. Lack of intrusion will help you kill a big buck more than anything else. Yeah,
I agree 100%. And, just to put it in kind of layman's terms, it's so simplistic, and it's very much human nature for all of us to be, especially like me and you, Jason, we have neighbors that hunt. Well, you see that stand on the neighbor's side, lots of times guess what we want to do? Well, you know what? This area is really good. I'm going to put my stand right here. I'm going to see what that guy's doing when he's doing it. Well, guess what? That guy probably took liberties and walked on your side. Now you're setting up 100 yards from him. Now that whole area is completely pressured up. It's over, especially in a state like Michigan. The game's over. So a long time ago, I learned, you know what? I don't need to look at my neighbors. It's Michigan. Guys are going to be hunting regardless. So you got to get out of that, back off, like Todd said. Even if it's 3 to 5 acres, let that pressure be minimal, next to zero. Just stay away from those neighbors. That's huge, I think.
The other part is how good hunters are your neighbors and how much calling do they do, and that's what I realized. And we've probably talked about it on our podcast before. But man, the first year I bought my place, just like anybody else, I was green and I was out there rattling up a storm just like everybody, and just never was successful doing it. And then I started to realize why when I heard all the other hunters in my area using the can calls and the doe bleats, and then they do the rattle bag. And I mean, it was just so consistent and obvious that it was not a buck fight. It was some other hunter over there. So you gotta adapt and change with the situations. But, sometimes I have to follow my gut. And even though on October 31st, it's way too early to get aggressive, I killed my buck this year by going into the middle of the biggest section of timber, the most unbelievable sanctuary ever, because I just had a feeling. The wind was right. The conditions were right. I could get in there because it was blowing like a bandit. But it was also somewhat expendable because I knew for the big buck, I was hoping I was going to get a crack at later in the season. I knew it would probably be later in the rut. So I kind of felt like I had nothing to lose at the same time. And that's where I know a lot of my friends that I'm hunters with that I respect as like some of the best big buck hunters in the world. Some of them have that aggressiveness and some of them don't. And it just depends on the hunter, the situation, your experience, and making it work for you. For me, I know for the deer I'm going to try to kill around here, I have to be aggressive because they will just not move around during daylight. So I have to move toward them. And sometimes that means you got to, put your arm on the old chopping block and not be afraid to lose a finger, because that's the only other option. And that's just what I've come to the realization. If I sit around and I hunt the typical pinch points and funnels and field edges in the back corners and saddles like everybody's been talking about and reading, if I hunt like that in my area, I will not get a chance at a big mature deer. I won't. Not unless it's pure luck. And pure luck is not how you consistently put big deer on the wall. And I can go down the wall of trophies that I have from over the years, and I can't tell you how much the first time in the run and gun set, those are the types of hunts where I kill those big deer. It's when you do something no other hunter has ever done before. Ever. That's how you kill that deer.
Now, hey, Jason, let me add one thing to the trail cameras. One thing I do a lot in the summer or, late summer is I will use the topography of the land as well for access. So if I can't access, one of those trail cameras by my car or ATV, I will legitimately walk way the heck out of my way to be covered by something to get to that camera. So very seldom, even when it's way out of season, I do my best not to put pressure on those cameras because to me, it's part of hunting. Especially in Michigan, like Todd said, I got to know that I have a big buck on that property, so I have to approach, that property all year as if I'm hunting. If a big buck's there, I don't want to blow him out. He'll be my only big buck on that property. So I will use whatever route in and out, just like I would go into a tree stand to get to a camera. I'll put that kind of magic on it just to, check an SD card to see what bucks I have in velvet. So I think that's been a big help. And I've noticed that I'll have that buck on my camera over and over again. So it's proven to me that I'm not bumping them by taking that extra effort.
And two, Brandon, you've probably gotten to the point, it's same things happen to me over years. It's like, okay, you get the trail camera pictures of them. you're not a photographer, professional photographer, trail camera owner. You're strictly just using it for intel. Once you know the animal's there, then you know that the last thing you need to do is go check your camera, see if you got more pictures of that buck. Once you know they're there, that's half the battle. And Jason, that seems like the biggest question mark in your brain is, how do you absolutely know where that buck is bedding, and target them specifically like that? Because that's how I hunt my deer, man. If it wasn't for their bedding areas, I wouldn't even. I mean, can you imagine, Jason? I wouldn't even know where to begin, and it took me years and years and years of hunting this area now to understand where bucks bed, why they bed there. And a lot of it has to do with topography. And I actually think it's way easier if you have topography to deal with, just like what you were talking about, Brandon. Even when I'm doing run and gun setups, man, topography is king. If you know or have an idea where a deer is, you've got to use every little bump and hump in the road to hide behind to get in there. Use everything in your tool belt basically to get in that vulnerability point with them. But every piece is so different and so unique. Jason, do you guys consistently get different bucks in your fields like every night? Or does it seem like they're on like a circular pattern where it's only every 3 or 4 days?
I don't know what's changed the last 3 or 4 years, but it's just become real unreliable. I haven't seen a good buck, between the 1st of September and the 20 whatever of October, and I really can't remember when. I guess I do remember when it was last year. I saw a good 8-point that my wife filmed when we were out. I wasn't going to shoot him, but he was one of the better deer that were running around. But yeah, I don't see a lot of them. Period. Until the rut.
Yeah, and that just tells me that most of those bucks are living. Their core areas are in other places, other farms. And I think another way where trail cameras can be deceiving is, you get here in Iowa, where it's famous for it. You get all these nighttime images on a mineral or on a corn pile or something like that, in the summertime. And then even if during the rut, you've got cameras now located on scrapes. If you're only getting nighttime images, middle of the night, and you're only getting them once a week, that buck is not living there. All he's doing is he's hitting the outer ranges of his core area. All he's doing is he's just keeping tabs on what does and what bucks are in those areas, and that when the time is right and he's bred all the does in his core area, that's when he'll start checking some of those secondary places. But the consistency factor, it almost makes it impossible to kill him, because you're only going to probably catch that buck one day during the rut. Literally one day. Now, you can't kill big bucks consistently, only having one day to choose from. And that's where you got to get back their core area, find out where those bucks live, and that's where you kill them. And if you can't hunt in their core areas, then you just, I guess start hunting does or something.
Oh, that was brutal.
That was brutal. I agree with what you said, and there's a lot of frustrations, and I think, Brandon, you would echo that sentiment. There's a lot of frustrations with hunting in these smaller areas, because there are so many things that keep those animals from being the animals that God intended them to be, because of the pressure, and whether that pressure is a result of people, squirrel hunting, rabbit hunt, whatever. Good Lord, it could be anything. I've got some folks there, and they're great people, but I swear it'll be November the 5th, and he's probably going to Facebook me tonight or the next after he hears this podcast and say, I'm sorry. But I mean, they'll be out there inevitably somewhere the 1st through the 10th of November with their chainsaws cutting their trails to their rifle hunting stands. It's different, and it presents a whole different approach. Would you agree with that, Brandon?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you hit it right on the nail on the head, man. That's exactly it. So, it just, we want it to be so different, like you just said, the way God intended it. Unfortunately, it's not. So, you got to either commit to doing things like we've talked about today on this podcast, or just going out there and, like, hey, it's the weekend. If I see something, I'm deer hunting. To me, that's no longer fun. I like doing it like this. I like going out one morning just to set a goal if it takes me an hour and a half to get one trail camera to get that intel. I think that's just the way you got to look at it in these high pressure states. You got to really kind of aim small day to day for the overall picture. And if you do that, I think over the year or 2 years, you're going to notice your success starts to go way, way up.
And Jason, too, the other part of it is, and Rich Baugh, who's a friend of mine who I bought my place from, I've had conversations with him about different things. And, I was talking about when I first bought this place about how I was afraid to walk out my back door for fear that a deer might see me 800 yards away on the neighbor's frickin', CRP field. And one day he kind of just said, he's like, well, Todd, you got to enjoy your property too. And I was like, kind of set in. I'm like, I think we get caught up in the competition side of things, and especially when we're filming and in the business side of it a little bit. Dude, you got to have fun. And at the end of the day, for me now that I've killed some of the bucks that I consider to be like my dream bucks, like hunting has never been more fun for me because I'm able to increase the amount of my tenacity and my aggression, and I will take chances that I would never take before because I enjoy doing that. I enjoy getting in so close where I'm either going to kill them or I'm going to blow them out of the territory. And I blow them out of the territory far more than I kill them. But that's what I enjoy now, is really pushing the limits of how close I can get in on these animals. But I'm in a different place in my career, and that's what I enjoy now, where 5 or 6 years ago, just to kill a mature deer on video with a cameraman was the greatest accomplishment or my greatest goal in life. But, as we get older, I think having fun is more and more important. So, I don't know. It's a tough thing when you can't accomplish your goals on your property, and maybe you just need to change your goals.
Yeah. Well, you know what? And it sounds like, Brandon, you've got a good thing going, and Todd, I know you've got a great thing going, and my run on this property is about to end. And rather than wait for it to hit me like a fastball in the head and become a surprise. I mean, I know eventually it's going to boil down to that. I'm going to David and I have talked about it 100 times, and this year we're just going to do it. We're going to find somewhere else to go for the majority of the time, and leave it alone and leave it untouched, and see once if that makes the difference. So I guess maybe we should have a podcast sometime in December so I can tell you guys you're wrong or you're right.
Heck yeah. I'd be curious. Just, I've been following, we've been following all these different team member seasons ourselves for all these years. So, you kind of almost pattern your hunting, and I'd be really curious myself to see how it worked for you, because it's the story and the question so many guys deal with, man. I mean, I'm fortunate I live in Iowa. I've got hunters around me and all that. But compared to Michigan or compared to Wisconsin, it's a whole different animal. And the reason I moved down here was literally to get away from people so that I could be near the deer. And now it's become more popular and there's more hunters and everything. But, everybody's got their scale of what they consider to be pressure a mature deer. And that's what makes it cool. That's what makes it hunting. And I know if I were you, Jason, I'd just ask Brandon if I could hunt on his property. That's that. I was going to do that here in just a minute. But before we do that, I think, Brandon, I've got to tell you, you haven't been to Todd's place in maybe the last couple of years. But I think we should maybe start a GoFundMe thing, whatever. I'm not sure how they all work. But, I was out at Todd's this year, and he mentioned having a bail blind. Well, he's got the remnants of a bail blind. He's got that metal structure and then the black tarp that goes over it. And any resemblance whatsoever of bail is gone. It's like there was a fire, and it burned every bit of it off. I rode by it, and he's like, yeah, that's my bail blind. And I'm like, that's not a bail blind. Dude, the camouflage in the darkness is fantastic, though.
It's a nighttime ninja blind, huh?
It absolutely is. You look at it and you go, boy, that poor thing looks like, I don't know, anemic or something. But I just feel like we need to pass the hat for Todd so we can get him.
Attention redneck blinds. Todd could really use some new covers for them. And the funny part is, Jason, those bail blinds were actually the very first Blind Ambitions bail blinds, and Redneck ended up buying them. But I did some product design and engineering work for them when they were designing those. So those are the actual first ones. Those were the first ones they ever made, and I've had them all these years.
I remember you left me alone at the Wisconsin
bail
Deer and
blinds.
Turkey Expo. David and I and a couple other guys in your booth alone by ourselves because they just came over and took you, and you were gone for like 4 hours.
And that poor bail blind, she took another trip because it had it up on top of a platform, and that whole platform tipped over during the last set of storms we had. So it's we had such strong winds, but those bail blinds are sweet because they have a metal frame. So if you guys get a ton of snow, like we don't get a crazy amount of snow down here, but pop-ups, when you get a lot of ice and snow, that becomes an issue. It always collapses them, and as soon as they get collapsed, man, it's just a matter of time before you start breaking poles. But those bail blinds are sweet from that standpoint, that they're tougher than heck, and they last literally for years. You just need to occasionally recover them so they don't look like like a black molded pile of hay.
No, there's no hay there at all, Todd. There's none. There's zero. It's gone. There's grass. There's grass on the ground. We'd be farther ahead to blow glue all over it in a good windstorm and then just pick the grass around it and throw it on it.
I'll take what I can get, man.
I've always wanted to give you a hard time about that. And when you were talking about having a bail blind, I'm like, I need to set the record straight here. I have a bail blind. And I did shoot a doe out of it this year, and that was it was almost like cheating. It was fun. They got in real close, and they don't know you're there, and it is a lot of fun. Those are cool. Well, there you have it. Todd and I's conversation with Brandon Hammonds. I'm serious, though. We do need to start a GoFundMe account or whatever you do to pass the hat and get Todd some new exterior for his redneck bail blind. That thing, if it's got one blade of grass on it, I'd be surprised. It looks so anemic. It's sick. I love to give him a hard time about it. As always, thanks for listening. We appreciate each and every one of you. If you could, give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play, wherever it is that you listen to our podcasts. Hey, also, in addition to giving us a review, watch social media this week. We'll be launching our brand new whiteknuckleproductions.com website where everything is going to be brand new. It's going to be mobile friendly and all the cool new techie stuff that's out there for you guys to enjoy. So sign up for our monthly newsletter. And again, thanks again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week.